One of the things I've been focusing on lately is the idea of discipline, self-discipline, and it's become a really important focus for me this year. So I want to do a couple podcast episodes on this idea of discipline, what that means, why it's so important to me. And today I want to talk about how to find the right dose of self-discipline and find a balance with too much discipline and not enough discipline. And I think that's something that I'm constantly striving for. Maybe you are too. I think it's a middle ground, but it can easily tip to one side or the other. And I think it's easy to be swayed and influenced by other ideas or people or other people's goals that can pull us off track of what that ideal balance of discipline looks like for us. Before I jump into the episode today, I want to mention a company that I love, a brand that I love, and I'm an affiliate for, Just Ingredients. If you're like me, you're always looking for products that are good ingredients, high quality, something you can trust. And I'm a big fan of Just Ingredients. I love their protein powders, but they have a lot of amazing products. I will link them in the show notes. You can go to justingredients.us and use the code Stephanie Webb and get a discount on your order. So I hope you love their products as much as I do. Okay, let's jump into talking about discipline. So like I said, this is going to be kind of a little series about discipline. And today I want to focus on the right amount or the right dose of self-discipline. This idea of the right dose of self-discipline I found in Oliver Burkeman's newsletter most recently. Oliver Burkeman is, I don't know if I would say a philosopher, a thinker, a content creator, an author that I really admire and follow. And I read his newsletter and I love it. He's the author of a book that I love called 4,000 Weeks. I'll link that as well because it's a book that I recommend. He sent a newsletter probably last week about how mid-January is a really good time for reflection. And we're kind of all over the frantic goal setting of New Year's Day. And his idea in this newsletter, which again, I will link, you can read the whole thing, but he kind of leaned into this idea that you might need, and he said, you might need less self-discipline than you think. And I think that's worth exploring. I partly agree with this. Mostly I disagree. I don't know, mostly, maybe 50-50. But this idea got me thinking about discipline and where I land on this. So he says to find the dose of self-discipline that works for you. And I agree with this, and he talks about this idea that we can trust ourselves, our moods, our emotions, our inclinations to lead us in the right amount of discipline. I'm going to do an episode coming up that I'm still kind of noodling over in my brain that I don't think that this is true actually, because discipline is not intuitive. So I don't think that our feelings can be trusted to lead us in the right amount of discipline, but I don't think we should completely disregard our feelings and our emotions in how we implement discipline. But I do agree with Oliver Burkeman in that willpower and discipline can be taken too far and they can suck the joy out of working toward a goal, even a goal that you care about. He says this idea of like deciding what needs to be done and then forcing yourself to do it soon peters out into procrastination, self-loathing, and resentment. And you've probably experienced this. I certainly have, where I set a goal maybe that is not actually in line with who I want to be. And so I do think it's important that we're willing to abandon this goal or what we're working toward or adjust it so that it does fit with who we are and what we want. I'm going to read his opener to the newsletter because it was kind of this jumping off point for me thinking about this. He says, mid to late January strikes me as an excellent time to consider the goals you'd like to achieve this year. It's much better than, say, the start of January when you might have allowed the calendrical moment to fool you into launching an aggressive plan to transform your life completely, the subtext of the plan generally being that you are a disastrous person who needs to fix their disastrousness immediately. Hopefully by now, all such initiatives have run safely into the sand, leaving you free to consider what actually works when it comes to achieving your goals. And one thing that actually works, I've come to understand, is to find the dose of self-discipline that works for you and to recognize that it might be quite a lot smaller than you'd assumed. Again, there's things I agree with and disagree with, and I love this newsletter / article because it really led me to think, and I respect that so much in people that challenge what I think. It's really easy to slip into negative thought patterns around willpower and to force my way or muscle my way through tasks that I don't want to do. Generally, though, I think, and I think this about most of us, that we're self-aware enough and perceptive enough not to just work toward goals goals that we don't truly want deep down. I can see how goal setting or productivity, just as like a concept, can become a game of white knuckling and forceful following through if the goal is off course. Like a goal like writing a novel. That's something that feels deeply important to me, even if I cannot fully articulate why I want to do this. And sometimes I question the entire endeavor. Like, what on earth am I doing? And many days, possibly even more days than not, writing fiction feels like drudgery to me. It feels difficult. It feels uninspiring. It's a task that often I do because I said I would do it. But does that mean that I shouldn't do it or that it's not worth exerting my willpower or self-discipline? I don't think so. I think that even though it's hard, and maybe because it's hard for me, it's worth doing. I believe that in general, self-reflection that leads to new initiatives or a goal-setting process, no matter when it is, whether it's January or not, should be tempered by an understanding of my reality, the limitations of my life and my time and my schedule, my personality, my existing commitments, along with my dreams. And also, I think a sort of gentle acceptance of who I am and what I can realistically accomplish. I don't think that New Year should be, like Oliver Burkeman said, an aggressive plan to transform your life completely because you're a disastrous person who needs to fix their disastrousness immediately. I totally resonate with that feeling of like, I cannot be like this anymore and I need to immediately change. I get that. And I think that coming from that place of feeling like I am an emergency, like I am broken and I need to be fixed urgently, that's a quick recipe for exactly what Oliver Burkeman is talking about, failure or burnout. And a goal set from that place will be disconnected and it will be disingenuous. And those seem like the types of goals or projects that we set when we don't really want something, but we think that we should, or we feel obligated enough that we add it to our plate, even if we're not truly deeply committed to it. Like there have been times in the past when I signed up for a race. I did a triathlon, I did a 5K because I thought I should be the type of person who ran and raced. Other people around me were doing it. And I felt like, well, I should probably do this. I deeply did not want to spend my time that way. And the outcome was not worth it to me. But I did it out of a sense of obligation, which I had created completely manufactured wholesale in my brain. So of course it was a miserable failure. So now I approach running as a system in my life, an activity that I do because I want to, but I do not, and I have not signed up for a race because I know, even though there's this aspect of working harder when you're working towards something big, I have found that the process itself is rewarding enough for me that I don't need to push myself to do something I don't really want to do. I'm okay with just committing to the process and following through on a smaller level that feels more reasonable and less stressful. So I've learned from that experience in setting goals that I don't need to overhaul who I am. I need to take who I am into account when I'm deciding how I want to improve myself. I don't need to dump out entirely the box of my personality and refill it with other activities or other hobbies. I need to know myself enough to know what's kind of within my wheelhouse, as they say, what's within the realm of like what would be pleasant to strive for without killing myself over, but also what would be worth it, what would be worth pushing myself toward. Now, I do want to make one more note here before I wrap up this part one. I, again, disagree with this idea that we need less self-discipline than we think. I think what we need is self-discipline in a meaningful way, applying our efforts to something that matters enough to deserve that effort. I think we need a lot of self-discipline to be successful in life. And I don't think there's a way around that. I don't think self-discipline is like a product of like evil capitalism or toxic productivity. I think that on a spiritual level, we are designed to create and produce and work. Those things make us feel good on a deep level. It's not just about output. And I think that's the argument for some of the people who warn us away from like rabid productivity or toxic productivity, where it's just productivity for productivity's sake. Output is great and output is fine. But I think that self-discipline is essential because it gets us to do things that maybe aren't pleasant, but are worth it. It's more of who we become in the process of working towards something that matters. Next week, I'm going to talk more about what I've learned from writing novels and failing largely at writing novels so far. But I want to put a pin in this discussion today and come back to it next week. So I hope you will join me for next week's episode and possibly the one after. I'm just really loving thinking about discipline and what that looks like for me. I will make sure to link in the show notes the resources that have gotten my wheels spinning in this way. I think just like I talked about finding a groove, I think discipline is we need discipline to find the right tension on that record player needle. We need just enough to stay in that groove without forcing it and white knuckling it. So I really just am loving learning about self-discipline as a tool for growth and creation, and also not letting it go too far and getting in this realm of like becoming toxic or rigid or unhealthy about it. It shouldn't feel joyless or always forceful, but I think it's so important in allowing us to become who we were meant to be. So I hope that this gets you thinking about discipline in your life and kind of this middle ground as a beginning point for this discussion about self-discipline, like what that middle ground looks like for you. Where are you when it comes to self-discipline? Do you feel like you tend to be too loose or too restrictive, too tight on the spectrum? I think there's, we kind of ebb and flow in and out of it depending on seasons. And I think aiming for this flexible but hardworking middle ground is where we all want to be. So it's just a good opportunity. I hope it is for you. It has been for me to think about as I've gotten into, a month-ish of New Year's goals and evaluating again, is the way I'm spending my time a reflection of who I am and who I want to be and not who I think I should be? So like I said, I'm going to dive deeper next week into how self-discipline shapes us, even when it feels difficult or unpleasant, and why it's still worth it. So I hope you'll join me again next week. Thanks so much for listening to the Hey Steph podcast, and I'll talk to you later.